according to the polls, the majority of New Zealanders want physician-assisted suicide, and the Health Select Committee in Parliament is hearing what people have to say. They received a massive 21,000 submissions on this issue. So quickly, around the panel before we get to our guests, should people have the right to choose if they want to die? Let's start with you, Paul Foster-Bell. What do you think personally?
My personal view probably is pretty close to the Prime Minister's, but I would want to see...
What does that mean?
Well, look, what the Prime Minister said is that you actually have to have a draft piece of legislation and have a very close look at it so you can understand how it'll affect the vulnerable, how it'll affect people who may...
So is that a yes or a no?
Well, look, I'm not going to say yes or no without seeing what the bill is.
Come on, Paul! It's a conscience.
No, it would be foolish to say yes or no without seeing
anymore, they block vote.
Hey, enough from you.
That's true.
All right, Ron, what do you think? Should people have the right, if they want to die, should they have that right?
Well, New Zealand First has always said that we will go with a referendum and we will take the decision that the nation delivers us. But if you're asking me if I'm put in that position, I've consistently voted against it.
So no.
In my time. And when my colleague Peter Brown put up legislation, because we do allow our MPs a conscience vote on things, I voted against it back then. Right now, we'd be comfortable with the whole of the country having that decision.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so no. What about you, Peter Dunn?
Well, I've thought...
Yes or no to voluntary euthanasia?
Yeah, I've thought long and hard about this. I voted against it previously. I actually think as time goes by, the critical issue here is respecting an individual's decision and judgment.
So?
And provided we get the right sets of conditions around how that decision can be made by the individual and recorded and respected, then I think those wishes should be upheld.
Wow. Okay, so that's a yes. Megan Woods, Labour?
Yes.
Straight up.
Straight up. But I do want to see the legislation and ensure that we've got the right shape around that. I think there is a lot of detail to be worked through, and that is something that has to be done responsibly.
All right, Big House tonight, and I know it's a big issue, it's a personal issue, but hands up those in the pub tonight, if you can get the cameras there, hands up who are for voluntary euthanasia in New Zealand society. My God, that's like 95%. Hands up those against. 2 people. That is absolutely amazing as a snapshot. And maybe one person. Okay.
4 down there.
Hayley Holt.
Yes, I'm with Dr. Brian Ensel, the Director of Palliative Care at the Mary Potter Hospice. Now, you obviously see people at their end of life a lot. Do you think this is a good idea?
I think that there are some people that I've met over my career of 30 years for whom euthanasia might seem to be appropriate, but not a lot.
And why not? Who's it appropriate for?
Well, I think that's a difficult question, because I think that not the myth, but the current dialogue is about people in pain and suffering, but the evidence is much more that it's about autonomy and dignity and that sort of thing.
What about the quality of life? Some people might not enjoy being unable to move around.
Absolutely. So quality of life is very personal.
Yes.
Very hard to judge from the outside. You judge what your own quality of life is.
One does judge this, and so we sort of have this view that, yeah, if you want to die, it's your choice. But is there a chance that you could be coerced by caregivers or people who want you out of here?
Yes, so that's one of the big concerns, is protection of the vulnerable. And making the legislation, and I really don't know how to do that, because coercion is often very subtle and even subconscious, and people are just trying to be nice. And the problems with funding aged care. And so you want to keep all that out of it. You want to keep that well away from euthanasia. But how do you do that? And that's not easy.
So you're not against it as such, you don't know how it can be controlled?
I find the legislation very, very difficult to make it tight enough for a few people, protecting vulnerable, and also taking into account the whole ethical thing, and the medical ethics is a really big factor in my discussion. And so that worldwide and nationally, medical ethics is saying, no, this is not ethical. And I'm mainstream in that. I struggle with the ethics.
Thank you very much for that, Theo. It's a very complex issue.
Yeah, no, and look, we've got the other side very, very shortly, but that's a big thing. Coercion. Imagine that. A 91-year-old mother in hospital, the young family gather around, and there's that pressure, Megan.
Oh, look, absolutely.
That is what I'm really concerned about.
Oh, look, and I'm really concerned, and I think everybody is concerned about that. And that's why I say we have to get the legislation right. Look, I'm actually really proud of the New Zealand Parliament at the moment. I think we're dealing with this issue in a really mature and calm way, that we've said, let's take the party politics or the individual out of it and have an inquiry through select committee.
Peter Dunn.
Well, look, I think if you're going to make the decision at the 91-year-old stage that you've talked about, I think there are real problems.
Yeah.
I think we actually need to change the conversation and get people to start to discuss with their families much earlier what their life plans are. And I'd strongly recommend anyone who's interested read a book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande.
I interviewed...
Because that really sets it out and was influential in changing my thinking. And I think if we can have the conversations earlier and there can be clear expressions of what a person's wishes are, then a lot of the concerns can be overcome because that has been stated clearly in advance.
And that is, look, that's a great book, by the way, Being Mortal. Check it out, Atul Gawande. But Hayley, you've got a very special guest. He's over from New York, here for the show tonight. What do you got?
Matt Vickers, the husband of the late Lucretia Seales, who campaigned for assisted dying. You obviously are of the view that this should be put in place.
Yeah, absolutely, it should be put in place. I mean, we're at a point now where we've got enough evidence from overseas that we know that it's going to work. I mean, you look at a country or a state like Oregon in the United States where it's been law since 1997. Very, very few people make use of this law. So only 150 people in 2015, and that's in a state with the population the size of New Zealand, actually access this. But for a lot more people, knowing that option is available to them is tremendously palliative in itself. A lot of the suffering actually comes from the psychological and emotional turmoil that you go through as you're approaching your terminality. And so...
Speaking of turmoil, as somebody who watched your loved one wanting to die, to use this assisted dying, how hard was that?
It was incredibly difficult, but and when she first sort of approached me with it, I wasn't convinced, and it took her to convince me that it was the right thing to do. And ultimately, it came to the point where I decided, well, who am I to stand in your way? If you care about your quality of life and that's more important to you than the length of your life, then who am I to say that you're wrong about that? I loved my wife Lucretia, and I wish she was still here. But the decision that she made was really about respecting her autonomy and identity.
Was there a moment, any moment, that she wavered in this decision?
Oh, look, I don't think at the end she would have actually chosen this if this choice had been available to her. But the fact that she had the choice, or would have had the choice, would have meant that it would respect the fact that she was not a victim of her illness, but someone that was dealing with that illness and was making decisions about it. So, she was a very strong person, and she would have been able to deal with the pain, I think, the physical pain that she would have gone through. But really it was about everything that sort of led up to that, and the fact that she wanted to be autonomous and make her own decisions about her own care.
Thank you so much for that, Mac.
Hey, round of applause for our two guests, Matt Vickers, Brian Ensler, thank you very much. And later on in the show, we're giving away Matt's book here, Lucretia Seales. Can you get a bit of a shot of that? Just a bit of a... Yep, nice one. All right. Hey, stay with us. Backbenchers next.